All right, time now for In the Market, and like you can hear, the conversation is already happening just beside me. Laban Cliff Onserio is joining me. Laban, what are we looking at?
Greetings, Trevor, again. Good morning. Of course, being Thanksgiving, and I should say happy Thanksgiving to you, Trevor. Just focusing a lot more on the holidays back in the States, and of course, just at home, we want to look at how is it that the country is doing business with, of course, how is the business the country is doing with the United States, a lot more on the doing business parameters with the Americans, and a lot more, especially also on just looking at how the economy is going to move from this. So in the first bit of our conversation, we're just going to go into kind of future forward. There's that story you just played there. Of course, preparations are ongoing for the swearing in ceremony. But before, of course, we go into kind of the meat of it and just delving deeper into the whole discussions, allow me to just quickly introduce my panel, and then we can see what is on the Business Daily and, of course, in the market. Trevor, I know you mentioned about Safaricom gaining ground. We're going to play that to you shortly. But first, to the ladies and gentlemen here, thank you very much for braving the cold and being here. From my far left, I have Vivek Sunder. Vivek is the Vice President of the American Chamber of Commerce, or simply put, AmCham. And next to Vivek is Angela Ohkupe. Angela Ohkupe is actually a Wharton graduate for the year 2016, and of course, formerly with BNP Paribas. I should say America's, actually the world's 4th largest bank, indeed. And then now we come to Charlene Migwe. Charlene, most of you will recognize the face because she has been the president of the Mandela Washington Fellows. That's back into 2014. That's in East Africa. But right now, of course, she was a Mandela Washington Fellow in 2014. And of course, we're honored and glad to be here, being, of course, also with her. You tell us a lot more also on your works outside the fellowship. And next to me is, of course, another guest that, of course, has been here a lot more, Dr. Scott Bellows. Dr. Scott Bellows, who's the chair of the Innovation Center at USIU. Thank you very much, ladies and gents, for being here. All right. Before we get into our discussion, let's have a look at what is happening, especially on the business front and across our board. Let's take a look at what's on your copy of the Business Daily today. Of course, we led with this story right up. If you can see it right on your screen, that's Safaricom gaining the highest ground. That's hitting the highest price since the NSC listing. And of course, there's been a lot of conversation that is the market getting round, and is the market, of course, coming back into, bouncing back into activity. So that's on your copy of the Business Daily. And of course, you want to look at that Mobius car that was introduced. This is a new generation model of vehicles that came about, and of course has increased actually, demand has outstripped supply, I should say, and especially also getting markets from the United States. But let's go to that story about Safaricom gaining ground. We have a look at the share price was high up at 28 shillings and 50 cents per share. We had different, of course, market analysts predicting into how this will impact on the economy at last. But of course, we'll come up to that, and I'll want to engage you further onto those details even as we go along. All right, so let's get right to it. I'm going to start with Vivek. We've moved in from the dailies. We're now moving into the swearing-in ceremony. So what is your assessment of the situation thus far on the business climate?
Well, the business has been tough this year. I wouldn't say it's been easy, but I think that most of us are not here for 1 year. So businesses will wax and wane, and we've got to just make sure that we are watching what's coming and investing for the year ahead. So I would be cautiously optimistic about the year. It has been a tough year, that's known, but I would not say that there's anything for us to be dramatically worried about.
All right. Angela, from your side, I know, of course, settling in back home, what is your view on the assessment on, what's the state of the country as it is?
Yeah, so I think I would agree with Vivek that business has been unusually slow this year. I think opportunities within the market are sort of less than what you would expect. When you're out there, there's a lot of talk on how there's a lot of opportunities back home and students should come back home and work. But then hitting the ground, you come to realize that the reality doesn't really match up to the narrative. And so we're hoping that within the upcoming year, that narrative is going to change. Yeah.
Charlene, you're actually in the business itself. You look a lot more on matters data. Yeah. What's coming forth?
So I think about it from this perspective of smaller businesses, how hard they've been hit by the economic crisis we're going through because of the political situation. These are businesses that are growing in the market. These are businesses that are trying to understand their products and grow their products. So imagine Kenyans are wary of investment. Kenyans are wary of spending. Kenyans are wary of taking risks and buying into new products. So I think from the SME market and some small businesses, it's hit us really hard, but I'm still very optimistic about the future next year.
Doc, are you optimistic?
Very optimistic. I'm a pro-Kenyan optimist.
All right, why so?
So, of course, uncertainty obviously is going to hinder investment. It's going to hinder spending, right? Why would I buy this plot if I'm not sure tomorrow, what's going to happen? But if you look at us compared to all of our regional neighbors, right? If we look to the north, to the south, to the west, we're by far still the most stable. We have the best growth prospects. So that's why all of our surrounding countries, they're still investing here. They're not deterred. It's like we're deterred from ourselves, right? And I think as soon as we pick up and start spending again, we'll be fine. All right.
So, Vivek, I want to go back to you because you're running PNG in East and Sub-Saharan Africa, and what came out of it, especially in that period, especially in this electioneering extended period? Any interesting insights?
So I think consumers, especially in the bottom end of the pyramid, were constrained on cash. As you know, inflation was very high, food inflation particularly. So of course, you're going to make choices on what you spend on. So some of the categories in which we play in, they contracted, and that's the first time it's happened for a while. But I would think that this is cyclical contraction that will bounce back once there's money in the hands of the people, because as I see, food inflation is down now. So of course, as the money comes back, you'll start seeing people expanding the basket of goods that they produce.
Of course, as Procter & Gamble, you're quite keen, especially, or just looking at how consumers, of course, spend and really ensuring that there's actually that pull factor. But that's what the panelists are saying. But let's have a quick look into what the International Monetary Fund, that's the IMF, said regarding the growth prospects in the country, especially coming in from that extended electioneering period. I had a chance to speak to Jan Mickelson, who's the regional representative of IMF, and here's what he had to say.
In Kenya, growth has been quite strong, even up to the middle of this year. Around close to 6%, really. Only since the last quarter of 2016, agriculture has not performing that well because of the drought. So that had drawn some of the growth numbers a bit down, while the non-agriculture sector has still been growing close to 6% up to the middle of this year. However, since the middle of this year, we have seen some slowdown in economic activity. The indicators do suggest that private sector growth has slowed down quite significantly over the last 2 or 3 months. And it's partly due to sort of the political uncertainty. There's a sort of wait and see attitude, both among suppliers, producers, but also among consumers, to see where the country is heading in terms of political development.
Let's focus a bit more on Kenya, and you mentioned a bit of uncertainty, and especially around the political situation. Just recently, we had the Supreme Court ruling, of course, upholding the re-election of President Uhuru Kenyatta. Do you see this, of course, even if it just happened recently, like having an impact, especially on the investors, kind of their sentiments into the future prospects of the country?
Despite the sort of political uncertainty and some slowdown in economic activity here in just recent months because of this uncertainty, we do see the economy in Kenya quite resilient. In a sense that there's still credibility and a confidence to the economy to be able to move forward. However, that will provide, that would assume that some of the challenges are also addressed. It would, of course, assume that political stability returns to the country, but it would also require some policy making in terms of addressing the debt vulnerabilities that the country has. The fiscal deficit, in our view, needs to be reduced a little bit to make more room for the private sector and also to reduce the public debt pressure.
So in a nutshell, what Jan says is that, looking at the economic situation in the country, at least in terms of growth, the picture is 2017 is better than last year. Well, that can be argued. Real GDP growth is expected to pick up. That's about from 1.4% in 2016 to 2.6%. That's in 2017. But generally saying, really it's a positive news. But of course, the country should look at, the debt levels and just look at, how we, how the country is spending. And of course, later on in that interview, I actually asked him about the, the interest rate capping and how that is influencing on banks and the private sector. So I just want to get a quick reaction from what the IMF says vis-a-vis what's on the ground. We'll start with you, Vivek.
So as I mentioned, the fact that consumers have less cash, a lot of our businesses are actually in consumer-facing businesses and not B2C rather than B2B. So B2C businesses have essentially struggled with consumers and cash. And that is something which is across industries. I'm seeing that as sitting in the chair of the AmCham. That said, the interest rate cap in itself, I think some of the slowdown that was coming was actually predating the interest rate cap. And I'm not an economist to be able to comment on the interest rate cap, but I can only comment on what our businesses, what our member companies are commenting on, which is this whole slowdown and consumer slowdown, which then of course has a knock-on effect on B2B companies as well.
All right. Angela?
So I think I'm going to talk on something a little bit different apart from the consumer effect that Vivek just mentioned, and this is on the sort of like the debt that the country is currently holding that has been mentioned by the IMF. It's no doubt that the debt that we are currently holding is quite high compared to sort of like the GDP growth that we are experiencing, and so I think based on that, we really need to reconsider what are the policies that are there in relation to the debt that we're getting and how exactly are we being accountable towards the loans that we are getting from international bodies to ensure that the money that's being brought into the country is actually being used for their intended purposes.
All right.
Yeah.
I should mention indeed, and you mentioned about debt levels. What numbers that we have so far is actually 15% of current debt levels compared to GDP. Charlene, why I really want to get a reaction is because normally at times when we have the IMF, the World Bank just giving this growth indicators, more often than not they're criticized because it might maybe have a different feeling on the ground. Yeah. In your data analysis, I don't know if there's something different that has come out from what the IMF has had.
Okay, I think I won't talk about the data analysis, but maybe I'll talk more about my experience as a small business coming up.
Sure.
And I think one of our greatest assets as a small business is the human capital we have in the country and capitalizing on that. So as a small business, like we have a policy of investing in young people. The people we employ are investing in young people to grow their skills and in turn grow our businesses. And I think that's one thing that Kenya can capitalize on. And that's why I keep saying I'm very optimistic in terms of the growth of business here. We have a market here, we have a vibrant market, as I say. Consumers just need to have more buying power. We have skills, we just need to grow what we already have, invest in existing businesses that are already doing something in their field, and that way grow the economy.
All right.
Yeah.
Doc, these are the statistics you actually use in class, and maybe you refer to, I should say. So I don't know, and there's also this whole debate about, practical versus reality, or what is mentioned versus reality. So I don't know, from also your students, who of course you teach executives, you're in the innovation space, how are you finding this statements about the remarks by IMF?
Right. I think whenever the IMF makes a statement, debt to GDP too high, right? I think sometimes there's a trend to be alarmist. If you just look, our debt to GDP is actually not too high. Okay? What's the concern is the rapid increase in debt to GDP, right? But if you just look on a pure sense, we're below the British debt to GDP, we're far below America's debt to GDP, and we're way below Japan's debt to GDP. So we're not bad off, right? I think in Kenya sometimes we get negative and we go into a negativity spiral and start being very down on ourselves. All we have to do is look around and see, hey, we're doing pretty well. Yeah. Okay, so our debt to GDP, not that bad. If it keeps growing, yeah, that's a concern. But right now, it's manageable. As long as a country has GDP growth, and we have strong GDP growth, year over year exceeding 5%, very enviable, one of the top 5 growing economies in terms of GDP growth. We can handle debt to GDP. We can handle it. So I'm not alarmist about it at all.
So, and of course the conversation, just before that, of course, he had actually had a debate. It was an open ground, and there's a lady that's the director of the economic pillar, the Vision 2030, saying that perhaps is the country really spending a lot more on infrastructure, and what is the argument into that? Or when are we going to see the benefits later on, perhaps onto...
Totally, it's cost benefit. I mean, if we're borrowing in order to pay civil servants, right? We're borrowing to pay salaries, that's You know, that's not the right way to use debt. You want long-term debt for long-term uses, right? So with infrastructure, SGR, you know, and how we'll be paying back SGR, that's a good use of debt, right? Paying maybe, you know, I won't say which sector, but, you know, in the government's peristatal, paying those salaries is not a good use at all.
All right. So just look at it now, future forward. Actually, I should mention that before, of course, the IMF was releasing the report. Today we are having the manufacturing summit taking place at the Kenyatta International Conference Center. Let's take a look at the Kenya Trade Portal. Now, this was a portal that was launched by Trademark East Africa. I don't know if my director can actually play that story for you. We had it for you last night. This is just looking at what the Ken Trade Portal, that was a story by Alex Mwangi, just looking at the trade portal just increasing and saying that we have a lot of resources in the country, but we have not managed to kind of profile them, you know, so in terms of just looking at it. So let's take a listen into this story, into really how do we ensure that as we are attracting investors, we're actually saying, indeed, we have a trade portal where you can go in and see. Take a listen.
Lack of information has been one of the key impediments hampering the efficiency of trade. Numerous steps to get the approval of documents related to imports and exports is the other one.
Ladies and gentlemen.
The launch of the Information for Trade or InfoTrade web portal is aimed at eliminating these hurdles.
The benefit is that now we have a one-stop shop for information. All trade-related information, whether it's requirements, institutions involved, where they are based, the contact people in those institutions, that is now all available. Previously, it used to take up to 10 days. I mean, the studies we have to take up to 10 days just to get some of that information.
It could, I think, reduce the time from around 10 days to, we hope, the click of a button. That will be a big step forward. It'll obviously increase the compliance rates by importers and exporters, and it will make, let's face it, the trade procedures available, transparent, and predictable.
The development of the portal by the Kenya Trade Network Agency, or KenTrade, began in May 2016. The data fed into the portal has helped bring to light the reason why Kenya at times shoots herself in the foot with regard to addressing the challenge of growing her exports.
Like exporting tea has got more than 50 steps. That is not realistic. So again, this portal provides us with the opportunity to identify areas where we are going to undertake reforms in order to we can bring them down to maybe 15, 20 or less.
The portal makes use of the UNCTAD e-regulation system, which is a database designed to make administrative procedures transparent, swift and efficient.
The portal has consolidated over 120 documents and procedures required for import and export in Kenya.
We've already documented 18 commodities. The documentation is done in terms of commodities that are imported or exported. So anything you want to import, you just click, you'll be able to search for it and you'll find it. We will continue documenting new commodities.
Kenya has now complied with Article 1 of the Bali Trade Facilitation Agreement.
Mid last month, the government launched the Kenya e-Trade portal to provide importers and exporters with relevant data and statistics to enhance their business.
Importantly, the integration between Kenya Trade Portal and Information for Trade in Kenya has been finalized.
Trademark East Africa hopes to link regional states with similar platforms such as InfoTrade together. Currently, the Kenya TradeNet system has over 9,000 registered users. The success of the portal will to a large extent be hinged on the public's awareness of its existence and its user-friendliness, which should extend to the mobile phone. Alex Mwangi, NTV.
All right, eliminating trade hurdles and just looking at how do you get information and how do you communicate to investors, import, export sort of conversation. Vivek, how's it for you, of course, as a business leader into when you just want to find information of all the countries you operate in? Has it been easy, and do you see this portal just changing the way of doing business?
So first of all, Kenya is already one of the easiest places to do business, even before it improved, what it was, 10 points, I think, on the, or 8 points on the ease of doing business.
Yes.
It's already the easiest place to do business, which is why most of our offices, the regional headquarters are based in Nairobi. So I think that these portals, once they iron out some of the teething issues, will actually just enhance it further. I would just look at it with a more positive outlook that says, yes, there are teething issues, but as they get better and better, they're just going to get better and better. The opposite of the negative spiral that Scott was talking about.
Which issues are this? Which issues that you would say that perhaps with the teething problems, as you mentioned, which are some of those? Maybe slow speeds, perhaps, or unupdated data onto where exactly you can get information?
It's a combination, really, but I wouldn't say anything that's a serious, like a showstopper. I just think the better coordination amongst the different bodies that are part of it is the core issue. Not so much the IT systems; those kind of things can get sorted quickly. Just better coordination between the different bodies would be immensely useful.
All right, Angie, I know you're quite keen on this. How critical is it to ensure that we actually have precise data as a country, even just about our own trade volumes?
Yeah. So I think from a personal level, I'm a very data analytical driven kind of person, and so being able to find data and statistics and numbers that can drive business decisions and also explain why you're taking certain strategic decisions is very important. I would say in Kenya, what Vivek is saying, there is availability of data. I don't think lack of data is the problem. I think it's access to that data that is the problem, because you do have a lot of different portals that have similar data, but then you find that the data is probably, you have some mismatch between the data. And so it's trying to figure out which one is the more accurate data that becomes an issue. And then the second thing is also on sort of like the format of the availability of data. So the whole point of you having data and analyzing it so that you can build knowledge on what someone else has already done instead of having to start to recreate it. But you'll find that you'll get a lot of data and statistics in, say, for example, PDF format. Then you have to go back and reconvert all that data and then go on to analyze it, which in my point of view is, a duplicate effort. And so if we can be able to, make sure that the portals that are being provided are also giving out data in formats that people can actually go on ahead to sort of increase knowledge rather than, going back to redo what has already been done.
All right, Charlene, I'm coming to you, but I see Doc really nodding. What are you agreeing with?
No, I completely agree with what Angie's saying. Yeah. In the US, for example, I used to do commercial banking, investment banking in the US, and this was in the 90s. And there was more data available. Right here we have tons of it, and we collect it, as you said, but getting it, converting it. In the US, you can look up what any company's sales are, right? Even through private providers, who survey companies and find out their sales, their margins based on their sales size, their customer size, their employee size. And you can make decisions on lending, on even selling, and what their capacity is to actually pay for the FMCG or whatever they're buying. And so I think we do have a ways to go in data, but I think Kenya, we've come a long way, even just getting security prices historically. If you look 10 years ago, we couldn't get that. You'd have to pay a data analyst to get that. So we're in the right track, and Kenyans do start to love data, right? I think it's a matter of time, but we are not there yet, to be honest.
Charlene?
Yeah, I completely agree with everyone here. I think, first of all, people think that IT systems miraculously sort out all the issues that we have. Like you just deploy a system
like
and
a
everything.
Magic box.
Exactly. Yeah, but then the success of any IT system is the collaboration of the people behind it. And as she said, there's an issue with the different organizations, be it government, be it the corporate sector, be it the development sector also can also feed into the any data that could be economic gain. How do they collaboratively work together to have complementary data that can give us useful information, not just at a higher level, but also smaller businesses like us or government. So disaggregated data to the level that is understood across the board, as she said, in terms of representation. But then I think the key message behind it is a collaborative effort behind the system.
All right, collaboration, looking at data, current data, of course, and just that seamless interworking, I should say, of just different agencies that we have. Well, greetings. This is AM Live in the market, and we just began discussions with my panelists here, just of course enjoying ourselves, really how the reaction has been in the first half of the hour. My name is Laban Cliff Onserio, and today we're just focusing a lot more on doing business, not only with East Africa and of course in the country, but of course with our trade partners and rightfully speaking with the United States of America. Allow me to quickly introduce my panelists before we go into some of the news-making headlines. Right from the far left, we have Vivek Sunder. Vivek Sunder is the Vice President at the American Chamber of Commerce, that's simply said AmCham. Next to Vivek, we have Angela Ohkupe. Angela Ohkupe is a Wharton graduate for the year 2016 and formerly with BNP Paribas in New York. And next to Angela, I have Charlene Migwe. Charlene is a Mandela Washington Fellow for 2015 2014, that is, and has also been in charge of the alumni network, and of course is spearheading initiatives right here in East Africa, of course with the Mandela Ocean Fellows and a lot more onto that space. And next to me is Dr. Scott Bellows, who's a professor at a lecturer at USIU, and the chair of the Innovation Center at the United States International University. Oh, great. Challenge is accepted. All right, so where you have these expert panelists in studio is that you notice they all have a kind of an inclination to matters to do with the United States. Today is Thanksgiving in America, and of course, what does Thanksgiving mean? What is this all about? We're going to come to that shortly, but before of course we get into that, we're going to look at the numbers into the trade volumes with the United States of America. But first, before we get to the discussions, Safaricom's performance at the Nairobi Securities Exchange, that's the NSC, has embraced a strong moving on attitude as the price of its shares rose to the highest level it has ever been. That's at 28 shillings and 25 cents each. Now, this is after a 5% rise, that is, from the previous trading session levels. Now, the price dropped to the close of the day at about 28 shillings. That's as at close of business yesterday. The record high price was recorded as the foreign investors rushed back to the NSC after political tension in the country. That's showing signs of a cooling down effect, that is following the Supreme Court upholding the President Uhuru Kenyatta's re-election. Now, this improvement also points to the investors' defiance of the NASA coalition's call to boycott the firm's products. That's on accusation of being part of an alleged malpractice. Now, further, the telecom giant is also the most capitalized company, that's the NSC, and was the main beneficiary of the foreign purchases, with analysts expecting it to increase further from interest from foreign buyers continuing in coming days. That and a lot more you can expect in your copy of the Business Daily today. Just looking at what exactly will this mean. I know for investors there will be like, well, do you buy this share or do you sell the share at this point? What to look out for. A lot more, especially also on your copy of In the Market and that new car, that's the Mobis car, produced by local investors, assembled actually in the country, and has received a lot of acclamation not only in East Africa but also in markets in Europe and the United States. Well, that is just a highlight onto what is happening in the market. That's as close of business yesterday, but of course we expect to see how that will spiral into the forthcoming days. But before I now go into discussion, just kind of to give you an overview, Kenyans will mainly interact with will mainly think about the United States, of course, from the previous visit by former President of the United States, that's Barack Obama. That was in July. There's a lot more conversations around the Africa Growth Opportunity Act, what that will propel for the agricultural sector in the country. There's a lot more also looking at, you know, the horticultural sector, direct flights to the US. Are the Kenyan flowers going to, you know, have quick transit times to the United States? So looking at all those business parameters, I have my power panel right here in studio. Let me start from Vivek, because he sits on the chamber that of course combines many companies that are doing business here, many American companies that are doing business here and kind of just voting for trade policies and kind of the ease of operations in East Africa. I hope I've got that correctly. So let's take a deep dive into what AmCham actually does, and to, you know, what are some of the interesting aspects you've noticed in doing business here.
Sure. So American Chamber of Commerce is, as you know, across the whole of the world, is a body to get American companies that are interested in the country, as well as Kenyan companies that are interested in doing business with America. It's not just a group of American companies, it's a group of Kenyan companies that have business interests in the US. To make sure that we get together, understand what are the common issues that are preventing us from making the pie larger, and also then work with different stakeholders in the government, with NGOs, etc., to make sure that we just make business better for both parties. So of course we have representatives from the United States Embassy as well. In fact, Jim Ricasio sits on the board with me. And what we found is that while the business has been tough, we are still very, very confident of American businesses expanding the pie, entering Kenya and making it big. Just this morning's papers have 2 American companies entering Kenya, so that's public domain already.
Which ones are those, by the way?
So Häagen-Dazs, which I'm sure you're familiar with. I was in the middle.
Fantastic. My stomach will be very happy about that.
Häagen-Dazs. Yes. And then there is an American company which has entered into condoms, but they haven't released the brand name yet. So I guess that's still secret. But that's in today's papers. So you can see how optimistic people are. These are not things that would have been decided yesterday. These are things that are in the making. So there's always interest in a country that is largely diversified economy and very good workforce, as we've just heard, and a place which is relatively easy to do business.
In any sectors you see that American companies are keenly interested in the country, also with Kenyan companies interested in the American companies, the key sectors maybe that come up a lot more in Amcham?
I think that there are 5 pillars that we talk about in terms of the areas of interest. There's obviously ICT, there's consumer goods, there's industrial, there's knowledge, or essentially, there's agriculture, and then there's diversified. So if you think through that, it pretty much covers everything in the economy.
All right.
There's no major sector that's left out in the economy.
All right.
Because the American economy is so diversified, and because Kenya is a very diversified economy, it naturally means that you're going to have a meeting of across different pillars. It's not going to be a oil only or gas only or minerals only type of interaction.
All right, great. I should also mention that Vivek is in charge of the Procter & Gamble business right here in Sub-Saharan Africa. So also speaking again from a practical perspective, that's what you actually focus on. Angela, you left the country, I think, was it 5 years ago? You went, with this equity scholarship and moving all across board. How is it for you, especially in studying in the United States? And what are some of the insights you see for Kenyans even just investing back home?
So what I would say is there is a lot of business opportunities back home, in as much as the reality sometimes might not seem the case. You just need to really dig your feet deeper into it, and it does take a lot of time for you to get that landing space sort of like solid on the ground. But I would say for Kenyans who are still in the diaspora, are still looking to invest back home, there is really a lot of room for partnership with a bunch of companies that are really looking towards the diaspora as the main target audience, for them to come in and get investments within the local country. We still need a lot of, maybe processes and IT improvement in that sector, so that people can do maybe, on-the-spot trading, or being able to buy goods and services directly from where they are within the diaspora. But I would say the outlook is, of course, positive. In terms of the U.S. companies that are currently working in the country, I would say that we do have, as Vivek has mentioned, a bunch of companies that are looking into Kenya specifically as a natural hub for them to get entry into the East Africa and African market as a whole. And so I think if we are able to really position ourselves as that hub and entry point for a lot of companies, we'll be able to get a lot of access from the companies that are coming in from the US, and really leverage from sort of like best management practices and some of the structures that they already have in place that have been working for them over time.
All right. I know Angela, you're trying to be very humble, but she's a Wharton graduate for the year 2016 and has worked in New York with BNP Paribas, but again has taken the decision to come back home and really see how the country can leverage on this human skill. Is that the sentiment around Kenyans who are living abroad, really to come back and invest? Or, well, you might get a better package out there and choose to stay in the States?
For the most part, I think the conversation is around coming back home. It's always an issue of, when is the right time. And I think this varies significantly based on what industry you're in. There are some industries like asset management, for example. In Kenya, it hasn't grown significantly. And so for people who are doing asset management, they would opt to stay a little bit longer in, the US or other developed countries before they can come back. But then you find a lot more people within IT, for example, really coming back home because there's that option. People interested in sort of international development and policy making would then come home a little bit earlier on to be able to engage in that. There's going to be, a couple of things that would have to change in terms of whether it's the salary that you'll get or, you know, whatever package you'll get. But at the end of the day, I feel like the kind of benefits that you have and the impact that you have on the ground would be a lot stronger than if you choose to stay back in the diaspora.
All right, great. And we'll talk about President Obama's visit into the country in 2015. Key message, of course, that came out. I think the only group that had exclusive access to the president then was the Mandela Washington Fellows. And Charlene, that is a group that you were in, and of course you traveled to America in 2014, and you know, had all this expansive knowledge gained. Talk to us through your experience, and you know, what challenged you even later when you came back home.
Okay, so really quick overview of Mandela Washington Fellowship. So it's a fellowship that brings Africans from all over the continent to go to different universities in the States, in the United States, and then you finally go back to Washington, D.C., where you are able to meet the decision makers of the country. The key thing of YALI is that it brings the fellowship, it brings people from diverse backgrounds. These are people in the business background, these are people in the development sector background, NGO sector, and the public management space. Why I say this is because just that exposure and bringing young African people from different countries and in different spaces opens up your perceptions. Secondly, I think it's a network. I was there 3 years ago, but I'm still doing business with my other YALI fellows, and we're different cohorts. Like when I just joined YALI, I was just running a business within East Africa, but I was able to expand to Ghana and South Africa and share best practices and grow businesses in that region. I know so many other fellows who are able to grow their businesses through that network. And I think it shows the beauty of young people. I think young people are very innovative. I know this is a very cliche word, but they really are innovative. And they're very enterprising. And what the push I think they need is, one, expertise, like to grow what they already know, and secondly of all, collaborative efforts to grow their businesses. And I think that's what such efforts, and I think I'm a proud product of the Mandela Washington Fellowship because of that. I think it's a network. I think a network lasts forever. A network keeps growing and growing and growing. And I think with such a network, you start having cross-border trade, such as example as my business, and you start having growth and best practices shared across borders.
All right. When Charlene says young people are very innovative, you chair the Innovation Center at the United States International University, Africa, simply put, USIU. From where you sit, how does that come out, or especially amongst your students? And just talk to us also about your experience locally, Scott. I struggle with identifying you either as an American or Kenyan, because you've actually kind of gelled in Kenya so well.
Right. I think my family has the same issue. You know, am I American or Kenyan? Right. But of course, in our innovation space at USIU, you know, we get a lot of very creative students, right? But if we were to look at creativity in Kenya as a whole, we're actually less creative. And I can give you an example. If I were to ask and give everyone here 2 minutes to write down as many uses for this pen as possible, what's the usual use for this pen?
Writing.
It's to write. Yeah. But there's other things. You could use it as a weapon. You could use right? You could use it to build things, right? There's many uses for an object. If we do this object exercise in America, right, in the state of California, right, on average we would get 12 uses for a pen. The first time people try it. In Kenya, the average is 6. Right? So on average, Kenyans tend to be less creative. It's called divergent thinking, if anyone wants to look it up. Right? So we tend to be less creative because in our education system here, right, from primary to secondary onwards, our education system teaches us what's the most appropriate use for this pen, not how many uses for this pen. And you see that, you know, proliferating. If we go up country to our shags here in Kenya, right, and you see maybe Shosho is doing farming, maybe not the right way, you know there's a better way. Do you challenge her and say, hey, grandmother or Shosho, would you know, how about you do it differently? Oh no, we would be quiet and respectful and let her continue, right? Whereas in other countries they might challenge, right? So our culture lets us keep quiet and not be creative. So if our education system from primary to secondary starts changing and we start doing these type of exercises, thinking, you know, what is the most appropriate use? Not that way, but how many uses for a pen, for a cup, for a paper, we'd be more creative.
All right. Just looking at the overview, and I want to just delve a bit deeper onto, matters to do with the U.S. trade. Just looking at different indices that have been put out there. I know time is really moving fast, and we want to make sure that we can cover all the topics that we have. But really quickly, if you just go to the online portal, and earlier just talk about data, and really on the census website of the United States, and just look at it with doing business with different countries. If you look at the 2017 report on the U.S. trading and doing business with the country, the last indices, they have data actually as early as even September 2017, indeed. And what we have there, exports to the country were at $35 billion US. Imports from Kenya were $57 billion. That's just showing the trade balance. Trade balance there being at a negative, though. That's in comparison to the United States. But there's been a lot of conversation about multinationals, about doing business, especially in the region. Let's take a listen to this interview with Arantxa Gonzalez, and I'm going to come back to you, ladies and gents, just to give a quick reaction. So Arantxa Gonzalez had a conversation with my colleague, that's Victor Kiprop from the East African. He was a correspondent, and this is what she had to say regarding, how regional countries are doing business not only with America, but of course with other source markets.
How do we make trade work for the rest of the 99%?
Part of the answer is with trade. Yes. On the trade side, I think what we know today is that the deeper the trade agreements, the better it is for the competitiveness of SMEs. Trade agreements should tackle as a priority leveling the playing field for small businesses, because they represent 90% of businesses in any country. And what we know is that including women in trade is going to be better for the diffusion of the benefits of international trade. So on the trade policy side, deeper and more inclusive is the answer.
So definitely, if you talk about Africa, its future and its growth and development has been hinged on its fast-growing youthful population. But one would wonder, where is the opportunity for the youth in trade?
Well, there is a huge opportunity for the youth in international trade, and it's called entrepreneurship. And this is why this is an amazing dimension in my travel to any country in Africa, and it's the case also in East Africa. Youth are amazingly smart. They are well educated. They have grown in a world where technology is much more prevalent than in the past. They are tech savvy, and they are eager to take a bit of risks. For this entrepreneurship to work, we need to ensure the ecosystem helps these entrepreneurs thrive. We need the entrepreneur to have access to capital and access to credit. And sometimes we are not seeing enough of capital in the region directed to entrepreneurs. It's seen too risky. I would say we have to start de-risking access to capital for the young entrepreneurs.
If you look at East Africa right now, the economic partnership agreement the region has with the European Union, it's only Kenya and Rwanda who have already signed and ratified the deal, because the rest of the members continue to drag their feet, most of them arguing that signing this deal could stifle the growth of smaller and local industries.
Trade agreements create opportunities. They don't lead to results. For results, you need more than trade policies. But I always tell governments it should not stop with signing a good trade agreement. You still have to invest. Very often what I have found in my travels in East Africa is there are amazing assets. In agriculture, this region is endowed with amazing assets, from coffee, tea, fruits, vegetables, spices. But oilseeds, cereals, I mean, you name it. The question is, a lot of these products today don't get to markets simply because they are not produced in sufficient quantities, with sufficient reliability of supply, or with sufficient quality standards.
Do you agree with her? Well, come on, let's jump into discussion. Hashtag AM Live at NTV, at Laban Cliff at NTV Kenya, and of course feel free to dial in. We just want to have that quick conversation into, are goods really competitive into just doing business with our large, I should say, global partners? Let me start with you, Vivek.
So Yes and no. I think the cost of doing business is still not comparable to the best in the world. And I would not want to compare Kenya to the average in the world, because for anything else, if you take even the best runners that we have, everybody's focusing on how to be the best runner and to break the 2-hour marathon barrier. So Kenya needs to have that mindset on the business that says, let's take the cost that we have in producing, the cost that we have in transportation, the entire cost that actually the consumer doesn't see, and let's basically attack it. Because essentially it's causing the pie to be smaller, it's causing the consumers to have less money in their pockets to buy, and so on and so forth. So if we do that, then first of all, it'll be a bigger market in Kenya, but of course it'll be most competitive, and everybody else will want to come here and buy it, because the workforce is very outward looking, it's well integrated from a trade point of view, the currency is relatively free, so all of those things are a positive. We just need to make the goods more competitive by attacking the cost side of things.
All right, Angie?
So I think to go off what Vivek just said, there's the issue of making your goods competitive, but then I think there's also the policy side that we need to look at. You know, you earlier on mentioned the AGOA sort of trade pact between Africa and the US, and you know, this is one of the trade pacts that has been very beneficial to African countries and sort of like to Kenya. But if you look at sort of like the details of it, in Kenya, for example, when I was looking at the report, we were ranking high in like the textile industry. Well, if you look at it, textile is not necessarily our strongest industry within the country. So why not look at some of this policy and really review what are the really strong points of these countries? Why can't we have goods like coffee and tea being added on to such policies, so that in the end we also benefit and are able to play within the global market at a place where we have a competitive advantage, rather than focusing on industries where we are not necessarily doing the best. We will always have a lot of competition from countries doing like bulk manufacturing and bulk processing, where, you know, in essence, on the ground, we don't necessarily have that capability yet. So is there room for us to focus on where we have that capability and incorporate that onto the trade policies? Because as has been mentioned in the interview, the policies do end up impacting what our exports and imports would be, and therefore it can end up, you know, reducing that trade deficit that we're currently working on.
Where do you think our competitive advantage lies?
I think we have a lot of lacking in terms of the competitive advantage, mainly because we tend to export raw goods and unprocessed goods, which once they leave out and get processed, we then have to re-import them at higher costs. And so there's still a lot of room that needs to be done in the country to sort of like increase manufacturing and put us in a place where we have sort of goods that are more on a complete level rather than looking at the raw end of the goods. And that's definitely like going to be like a longer term strategy and a longer stretch. And also in terms of, you know, services, our service industry, sort of like things like consulting services and all that, we really still focused on having them coming in from outside countries rather than building that internally. So it goes on to an issue of, you know, both the education sort of like, and how that translates to the knowledge that we have, and also the availability of manufacturing and production locally.
All right.
Yeah.
Charlene, a document that I know I had my hands on was on the U.S. strategy into just doing business, especially with the region. And one of the key pillars was on that regional collaboration where, well, to do business, they say, well, Kenya, you're quite small as 40 million people. You'd rather just come in and trade as East Africa, you know, so that we can leverage on scale at about 155 million people. But that doesn't seem to happen here. We're so differentiated.
Yeah. I think for me, I'd echo what they said in terms of manufacturing in terms of scale. I feel like the scale we're doing is still very small, and this is mainly because of issues such as cost and incentive to invest in the manufacturing side of things. And once we're not investing in the manufacturing sector, we don't have what we should be producing in terms of scale. In terms of regional coordination, I think there's still a lot of work to be done. As much as we're still talking about there are a lot of more talks amongst all the bodies, that the SADC, the EAC, that we need to come together, we need to have more free trade. But I still think talking about it is one thing, but how do you actualize it and bring the different organizations that need to actualize that and make that happen? Secondly, I think there's still the fear of we don't want to grow big anymore. Like, we're still at a comfortable space where I'm manufacturing this is my market. You don't want to expand to other markets or grow other markets across the region. The other thing is, most importantly, I think we need to start supporting our own Kenyan goods, because where do Kenyan companies validate their own products? Where do our local companies grow their own products? That's in Kenya itself. If you look at other countries, you start manufacturing within your country, you validate your product across where people are buying them, how you improve them, and then you grow outside. But you find a lot of Kenyans don't really support Kenyan-made goods, and that also affects the scale and how we're going to scale to other regions without even dealing with the local market.
Indeed.
Yeah.
And of course, there's that kind of in that talk. I'm not sure if you know how it plays out, where you see that we are trading a lot with other partners, and even countries are not trading. African countries are not trading a lot with themselves.
Yeah.
We're going to come to that. But Dr. Scott, what stands out for you, especially when you just talk about these trade numbers? And you actually seem to have gone to that portal where I looked at the
I look at it regularly,
trade,
right? Because in Kenya, we actually have trade is in favor of us, right? We export more to America than America sends to us, right? But you're right. What Angie was saying, we tend to send not processed, right? Just raw materials usually. We have fruit and nuts, coffee and tea, right? These are huge things that we export. But also the textiles. Textiles dominates, right, with $370 million a year in exports. That's slightly, it's processed, obviously. It's a little more value addition, but we need bigger value addition. A lot of people predict financial technology, right? We are the epicenter in Kenya of financial technology in the world. Yes, M-Pesa was first, but there's lots of other, new, innovative, like the
services,
exactly,
to just move. Yeah.
Totally, and the Ngong Road corridor, right, with all these from iHub to NILAB, right, to 88 MPH, Growth Africa, everybody along that corridor coming up with creative, mostly financial technology solutions. But in terms of a regional block, we do trade a lot regionally. Our biggest trading partner, Uganda, followed by Tanzania, right? So those are much bigger in terms of trade than the United States. But I'm optimistic of the United States growing in trade, because I have a bias, right? But if you look at what United States trades with us, airplanes, equipment, right? Much higher, waged workers doing those than, of course, what we trade. So you're right, we need to diversify. But what Vivek said in the beginning about our economy being very diversified, look across Africa. We have one of the most diversified economies, us and South Africa, right? Services make up the biggest component of our economy, not agriculture like most others, or in Nigeria you have oil dominating. No, here we're very diversified, and so is the U.S. If you look at the economy, composition versus from America to the Kenya, very, very similar, a lot of overlap. So hopefully, more integration, more trade, better jobs for Kenyans.
Indeed, looking at better jobs, we hope that we can come to a realization of the direct flights to the United States. You mentioned just a bit on the aviation sector. Maybe perhaps they're running a General Electric engine of the first flight that will do that. So ideally, the conversation regarding direct flights to the United States. Of course, there's been a conversation about has the Kenyan, of course, airports been secure enough to support, to kind of mirror what the US would actually require of the country. And my director will play a few of the Kenya Airways cuts even as we go along into this. The idea is this has been, there's been a lot of talk about this, and we're expecting the first quarter of 2018, to kind of have that in operation. That is as per the Ministry of Infrastructure. Vivek, what do you see this doing, not only from the trade perspective, but just in the whole, that relation with the United States?
So I think there are two benefits that it provides. One is the direct benefit for goods that need transshipment directly, cut flowers, anything that is essentially perishables, etc. This will of course make it much easier to hub into the United States and then to get exported quicker, etc. And Ethiopia already flies twice to the United States. So obviously that's an advantage because of KQ and ET are the big competitors here. Then there's an indirect benefit that is there about businesses and tourism and all of that stuff. And the fact of the matter is that a direct flight is as much a signal that the two countries are connected as to the direct benefits of physical infrastructure being connected. So I think there's a symbolic benefit in addition to the economic benefit of direct flights between two countries.
All right. Docs, you looked at you want to jump quickly. So
I think it's easier for him to get home. That's probably why he's...
Oh, it's easier for you to get...
And yes, it's easier for me. Yeah, of course, but he's right. There's the psychological bond. And Kenyan culture is becoming more and more similar to American culture, right? Even how Kenyans dress. If you go to London or if you go to New York, Kenyans dress more towards the New York side rather than London. So I think culturally, and we have what, over 100,000 Kenyans living in the United States. I mean, a huge diaspora there, as Angie, as you know, and of course, Charlene, as you know, you both have been there. So I think this psychological bond between the countries is very strong, and Kenyans have a very favorable opinion of Kenya, even before President Obama. And I think we should take a moment and mourn the fact that he's no longer president, and we have a very strange president in America now, but it's a later discussion, right? But even before that, you know, we had these very deep psychological bonds. Every American can talk about Kenyans and marathons and tea and lions. Well, yeah, but they should also know us for financial technology and entrepreneurship, not as CNN's hotbed of terrorism when there's more terrorism in the United States than there is here, you know, so.
Vivek, what I want to come to you is just because, and the conversation is really about that, you know, how easy is it going to be for you even just not to fly? But I'm just looking at you even as a CEO, you know, you would actually calculate your time, you know, time equals money. That's what you'd actually say, that any time wastage at the airports with the transit security is a bit difficult. Or if you have to fly to the States and maybe going to your headquarters, it, you know, takes you a longer period of time. I don't know, from a practical perspective, from where you sit, did you just see maybe?
Yeah, the practical perspective, of course, I can sleep and then get to the United States relatively quickly. but I genuinely think that for me, see, the reality is this: it'll probably be a 16 to an 18-hour flight. I mean, I'm not an airline expert, but it's probably going to be that. The benefit to the industries that will benefit is clear. But for me, I'm more interested in the psychological benefit, because let's be clear, it will probably fly to the United States or to New York or to Atlanta or to one of the big hubs. And the fact of the matter is the Kenyan diaspora, all 100,000 of them, are actually spread out across the United States. Yes, there are some pockets which there are more. So you will have to hub out of there anyway. So therefore, the benefit of flying straight into the United States is, from a consumer point of view, a lot more psychological than from a business point of view. From a business point of view, there are benefits, of course, that's an advantage. But from a consumer point of view, the fact that we are connected and it's one umbilical cord that connects us is the bigger one. All
right, great. I want to now shift gears, and that what Angie kind of mentioned earlier was in the Africa Growth Opportunity Act, that's AGOA, really spearheaded, I should say, or kind of brought forth when the then President of the United States, that's Barack Obama, visited the country. So I want to ask, I'll start with Charlene, basically on the Obama factor, and we're just going to see moments and pictures when Obama was here, which again, I said, you guys had exclusive access as the fellows. What stood out for you, especially in that whole, you know, because he's seen as the son of the soil, you know, and just I think even for investors out there, they'll be like, you know, it's easy to do business now that Obama is there, and then you're going to jump into the Trump factor.
I think Obama's key positive side was communication and how he communicated, and what really stood out for me is changing the narrative of borders, changing the narrative of the old narratives of Africa is a developing country, we'll just give them aid and move on. The narrative has changed more into developing trade and into more sustainable solutions. And I think that's what's key. That's what I really got from it all. The other thing is realizing, with my Mandela Washington Fellowship experience, realizing that sometimes you think small as a business, right? And if more small businesses could be exposed to networking with other businesses, both large and small, because you'd find partnerships within not just the small companies, but partnership with which are mutually beneficial between the bigger organizations and the smaller companies. That I think can also like really hit me hard as driving growth. So you'd find a few fellows were able to partner with American companies, and this is also because we were able to tell our own narrative. Number of times, to be honest, media is flawed a number of times in telling our stories. But if we, as the Kenyans or the Africans who are actually doing something, are able to tell that narrative and change that narrative, especially now at a time where elections and the political space has really distorted that narrative.
Charlene, you say media were flawed, but look, we actually covered the president really well. We were State House, we followed every single step that he took, and really just looking at and reported on the trade deals that were made. Maybe we could do better.
Yeah, you could definitely do better.
And what was going through your head, especially at the time when you're in America and the then president was visiting the country?
That was actually a very monumental time for Kenya, and sort of like, you know, improving the trade agreements that are there between Kenya and I'd say Africa as a whole. I think like you mentioned, there's a symbolic gesture to just even the president visiting, a country in Africa, and it shows that trust in terms of growth and development within the country. And so, it does bring in a lot of question to, right now, what really is America's agenda towards Africa. I don't think that's really clear. We really don't know. I feel like Africa has taken a back seat in terms of...
Especially in the last year.
Exactly. Especially within the last year, for sure, we really don't know what U.S. agenda is towards Africa and towards trade. And so, during the time of Obama, there was a lot of movement that happened, a lot of changes, even in terms of the visa policies and all that changed during that period. But then now the question is, all right, we have that, but what next? We don't necessarily have to hit a reset button right now. How can we actually grow that going into the future?
How does AmCham increase that excitement that was
so
there when
I wanted
Obama
to maybe agree to disagree with Scott
Sure.
here on the impact that the change of leadership has had. I mean, I can speak definitely for my company, but I can speak for a lot of American companies out here, which is companies have a mind of their own. It's a diversified economy. We don't necessarily take our guidance from who's specifically sitting in which city. So we will make it on the basis of considerations of the market, the economy, the industry, the attractiveness of it, and we'll make sovereign investment decisions. And I don't think if I just take up my own company, in the last 12 months, we have increased our investment into this company across every brand that we operate in, not decreased. And this is coming against two things. One, the narrative that somebody is changed in America, and two, the fact that there's economic slowdown here. But the fact of the matter is that there are times when we invest because we think that there is going to be benefit from that investment. And as I said, the Kenyan market is a vibrant market. It's a diversified economy. So I don't think there is that much of pessimism within the American companies that are out here about a change of leadership, and therefore potentially that Africa narrative becoming lower in Washington. That may be true for certain industries, but definitely not true for the bulk of the companies that operate here.
All right, thanks, Vivek. Dr. Scott, I hope you agree with Vivek that Trump being there, it still not change any relation that we've had with the country. What do you?
Well, it might change some relations, but in terms of foreign direct investment by American companies into Africa, no, and specifically into Kenya, no. I don't think Trump is going to change that. I think you're right. And foreign direct investment by American firms in the last data available was over $400 million US just last year into Kenya. This is substantial money, right? But I think what Donald Trump, or I should say President Donald Trump, the effects he can have are psychological, number one. And number two, he could kill AGOA. He talks against, multilateral trade deals with multiple countries and so forth. If he kills AGOA, right, I mean, that we would lose substantial, export and so forth. But it would not be the end of the day. I mean, the Kenyan economy has grown fantastically in the last 10 years. Our economy, our GDP is now, depends on your source, but over $70 billion US. Our GDP, the foreign direct investment from the US and official development assistance from the US used to represent, over 5% of our economy. Now, it's less than 2% and declining. So, even if President Trump wakes up one morning and his advisors actually let him follow through on the craziness in his brain and he changes AGOA or some other factors, no, we won't be that affected here.
All right.
So, on that point, to that point, Angie made the point about Kenya needs to understand what it is good at and get better at it. And essentially some of the things that she talked about, I believe, will not be affected by AGOA going down, etc. Because the kind of stuff that Kenyans can be good at, are already good at, are stuff that will transcend industry level agreements that are there. And that's why I think that the joining of the economies is going to be, in a sense, not affected by who's at the helm.
All right, great. You look like you want to jump in really quickly, Angie, because I want to go into the 2018 resolutions. Go ahead.
Yeah, no, I think the effect of changing sort of like U.S. policy would not necessarily be on the private sector, but more so on sort of like the public sector, because you find that most of the benefits that we're getting from, the investments that are coming in from the U.S., sort of like in healthcare and all that, when it changes in Washington, it does have a ripple effect in Kenya. We might sit here and say that, there wouldn't be a lot of changes within the private sector, yes. Businesses make their own investments and decisions based on, risk and return ratios factors. But when we're looking into sort of like other industries, which are also a huge part of the Kenyan economy right now, that eventually affect millions within the bottom of the pyramid, then we do have a problem, and that's where we also need to not be blinded and look into that as well.
Great, thank you very much. And you all like very positive. I want to make sure that we can actually make sure that we are very practical into what might come out of it. We are getting to the tail end of our discussion, and as I said earlier, this is a Thanksgiving period in America, and of course it's kind of in the holiday period. We're going to get into what exactly that means later on. But to the 2018 resolutions, from where you sit, and it really doesn't have to be representing just from a personal perspective, how do you pretend, or how do you want to see the country move forward, especially from this period? It's been a lot of drought, there's been a lot of issues, a lot more to do with the elections. So let's look at 2018, the resolutions for 2018. Ladies first. All right, let's go with Charlene.
So this is in terms of just business,
what do you see? Yeah, just on a general perspective. From where you sit, you run a small scale business, you're operating across countries.
Yeah.
What do you want to see for next year?
I think I'd like to see improvement in how we do business, and in the past there's a misconception of smaller business can't get any tenders from the government, or there's a misconception that, oh, I can't get an IT company from Kenya because it's just going to be a white elephant job where you just come, implement a software solution, and the quality isn't really good. I think from a small company perspective, we need to understand that we represent the industries that we're in, and we need to provide better quality services. And I'll speak out on that. We really need to improve our consultancy services in the IT industry, and also perfecting our skills and what we provide within Kenya, and that's the only way economically small businesses can grow. So have a good track record of the business that we do. Yeah. Let's stop entrepreneurship. Let's start having a fair business playing ground. And only way to achieve that is excellence in any business that you are. Improve your business products and bring excellence into the industry.
Thanks, Charlene. I'll take you up on that, especially about services. I want to have a conversation around that. Angela, in under 30 seconds, resolutions for 2018.
I think the key resolutions is, one, of course, is the political aspect. We need to have a lot of dialogue to ensure that our businesses and economics don't necessarily get negatively affected based on the political atmosphere. And so if we can be able to resolve that, we'll have a lot of growth. And then two, I think it's also just the institutional knowledge that we have from companies, like Charlene is mentioning in terms of consultancy services. You know, how do we translate that knowledge that we're gaining from outside countries and actually bring it home to have the local people gain that knowledge?
All right, let me come to Dr. Scott. Resolutions for 2018.
Right, I guess for two of them, I think 2018 will continue to reduce uncertainty, right? And as uncertainty increases in our neighboring countries, after Zimbabwe and President Mugabe being forced to step down, and then President Museveni, probably getting a little nervous in Uganda, and we already saw some shifts in army positions over there. So there's a bit of an uncertainty there as President Magufuli to our south increases his autocratic tendencies, which are very alarming to investors. Kenya becomes more and more attractive as we kind of move on after our election period, right? So reduction of uncertainty. And I think with us also, we have increased in accountability at local levels, right? Where we see people actually holding governors accountable for development locally. So these two factors, 2018, good year.
All right, good year. Last but not least, Vivek. Oh my goodness.
And give you the pleasure of carving the turkey.
Oh goodness, I was just about to
finish. It's not even about cutting it.
Oh goodness.
Oh, yeah, you can put it right in front of me.
We were trying to really push. This is a whole turkey.
We should give Dr. Scott the pleasure of doing this, because you must have experience being
I don't know how to cut a turkey.
Really?
Scott, in the absence of the direct flight, this is the best you can get.
So it's Thanksgiving in America, but Trevor, indeed, this, wow, goodness. I would think in my little tendency that this is actually chicken, but it doesn't look like chicken. This is
that's a turkey.
You know what the funny thing is? When our camera lady, a very beautiful Rudia, was there, and the first thing she saw the turkey, and she asked me, "What you garlic?"
So it's a Kenyan American.
She was ready to go all the way. But before we get into that, let me read a letter from the ambassador, Robert Godek. And by the way, we want to express our great great gratitude to Ambassador Robert Godek and the entire U.S. Embassy staff for the turkey. We're about to carve it. I've been told it's not called cutting.
Oh,
but I'll read it really fast. I would like to share a very special American holiday, Thanksgiving, with you and all Kenyans. This is my favorite holiday. We trace Thanksgiving back to the first bountiful harvest celebrated between early European settlers and the Native Americans. Today, Thanksgiving provides an opportunity to come together, a day for gratitude and reflection. Families share dinner, most often of turkey and many side dishes, and we use the opportunity to give thanks for all of our countless blessings. I am grateful for the many wonderful people and things in my life, especially my own family, starting with my extraordinary wife, Lori. I'm thankful too for the opportunity. I know, that's the point where you all go, oh.
You're such a good diplomat.
And I'm thankful too for the opportunity to have served as U.S. Ambassador here for these past 5 years and all the wonderful people of Kenya I've met during my stay. I'm also grateful for the ongoing partnership of over 50 years between Kenya and the United States. Together, we continue to build a remarkable friendship that is making the world better for all of us and for our children. Happy Thanksgiving. Pamoja tusonge mbele. Asanteni sana. I was running through that because people are angry. I know you just want to jump in. But before that also, I'm pretty sure viewers are wondering what Thanksgiving is all about. Usha, you give them a brief?
Right, yes. Of course, I think for Kenyans, when we hear the word Thanksgiving, the only thing that comes to mind is turkey, thanks to Hollywood and all the movies we watch. But there is actually a lot more to the holiday. For instance, the celebration of Thanksgiving is in general a feast to give thanks for the fruits of the precious harvest. In America specifically, it dates back to the 1600s. Now, there's some discussion about when the first Thanksgiving was, but many think it dates back to 1621. That's when the harvest was celebrated by the pilgrims. Of course, the previous year's harvest had failed, and in the winter of 1620, a lot of the pilgrims had starved to death. Luckily for the rest, members of the local tribe taught them how to grow corn, catch fish, and collect seafood. Now, the first National Thanksgiving Day was 1789, declared by President George Washington. Now, here's a fun fact. Thanksgiving Day doesn't actually have a specific date. It always falls on the 4th Thursday of November. Lucky for us, that is today. So some Thanksgiving traditions, we have the turkey. People give thanks for what they have in their lives. There's the cracking of the turkey wishbone, and then there's Macy's Thanksgiving Day parade, huge parade, and finally there is the Thanksgiving Day football. Oh, not finally, there is one very interesting, entertaining fact. There is also, of course, presidential pardons. This is where the POTUS pardons at least one turkey, sparing them from the oven. I think that's
Your Dr. Scott
any further people will kill me.
The president they have is very interesting. You reckon he's going to do that?
I thought he was going to pardon his son-in-law, but he pardoned the turkey. So
But indeed, we want to say thank you very much to the ambassador. I think that was a great letter written out there, and really want to appreciate. So, come on, happy Thanksgiving. Come on, guys, let's say happy Thanksgiving. To everyone who's watching, to all Americans. What did you say? How do you say? You don't cut the turkey, but you
carve the turkey. That's why Dr. Scott is going to do it.
Vivek, I'm sure this is not new to you. So.
And as Rubia looks for guys,
but there's one like very nostalgic guy on the table. I think he should carve it.
All right, so we're going to hand it over
unanimous.
to
you get to carve it.
Dr. Scott to kind of lead us into carving the turkey.
And by the way, all these are guys who make us all look good. They're never really on screen, on camera all the time, but you see them there, the ones who make everything happen here. In fact, one of them is here, Lavinia. I'd like to give us a message. What does this mean for you? She's our creative director, graphics actually director. Here you go. What does Thanksgiving mean to you?
Well, so growing up in Kenya and basically Africa, I have never actually had a chance to celebrate Thanksgiving. So this is my first. And I have never also tasted turkey, so why not?
Yeah, absolutely. Why not?
Scott, she's never done it before. Scott, she's never done it before. Give it to her to
actually,
carve.
I think you should carve the turkey. It's not cutting; it's carving.
All right. So how do you go about it?
You do it at a diagonal.
I think you
yeah.
Tell you what, Lavinia, just come right back here.
Yeah, go around, then you can.
I'm really scared. You're holding a knife and you're coming right behind me.
Yes, watch out, Laban.
All right. So Scott, how are you going to do this?
Sure. So put it at an angle, and then you put a lot of force and you start cutting it.
Out there. All right.
I guess that's why it's carving there.
Nice. All right.
Now
so you have to
go the other way and go this way and get a little piece off of it.
Oh wow.
Try
Lavinia.
This might be a Kenyan TV first, cutting a turkey.
Absolutely, and you're among the first people to do it on live TV.
Oh, how about turkey for breakfast? That's great.
Then Lavinia can taste it for the first time.
Java House will start having turkey and breakfast after this.
So, are we going to have a serving?
No,
yeah.
Our producer, if you... Wow, he's struggling.
Wow.
You're getting there, you're getting there.
There you go.
Okay, okay. All right, so should
We should have the first.
Then you have the first bite.
I think this is from Dr. Scott, yeah? Dr. Scott can actually...
Now you can show us how to tackle.
That's struggling.
All right. There we go. So as we delve into the turkey, we want to say another final thank you to Ambassador Robert Godek and the entire U.S. Embassy staff for all this. And happy Thanksgiving, everybody.